FM guys could care less about the shortwave pirates, and vice versa, actually, to some extent. But on shortwave, the activity that we're seeing now, I'd say, is very slightly diminished to what we might have had a few years ago, but not much. It's just about every weekend you can tune on 6955, which is where the standard pirate frequency is now, and you'll hear plenty of activity. And that tends to ebb and flow with the bus policies, and I just mentioned those 1,000 buses or more that were on FM, and the number of buses on shortwave has been very tiny lately, although that goes through waves. There was I forget what year it was, 3 or 4 years ago, there were 4 or 5 of them all busted on the same day, and that closed things down for a while. People were a little timid after that, but that seems to have disappeared into history in people's memories now, and we're not seeing busts at the moment, and so shortwave pirate activity is in very sound shape. And you asked me about North American stations, but last night, I think it was very widely heard, there were 2 Euro pirates up on 19 meters that were coming in very well. One on 15070, and the other one was on 15810, if I'm not mistaken. And so the Euro pirate scene is still very lively, and so is the North American pirate scene as well. Another thing a lot of people forget, many of the pirates that we hear are broadcasting from Canada.
Really?
I can't say that I know or even want to know in individual cases which ones are which, but some of the pirates certainly are broadcasting from Canada. The FCC has no jurisdiction there, and the DOC in Canada has very seldom busted stations like that. So that's part of the activity, and then another part of it comes from the United States, and it seems like that's in a very healthy condition right now. Where most of the arguments come in pirate scenes is in terms of the quality of the programming. I mean, after all, if you're into it as a DX or just listening to see whether you can hear a station or not, it's one thing, but if you're tuning it in to be entertained, which is part of what pirate radio is all about, I assume we're entertaining somebody with this netcast here, or maybe we put everybody to for a good Sunday afternoon's nap. I don't know. but if you're going to go to all the trouble of getting a transmitter, putting up an antenna, and producing a program, you would think you'd want to do some thought to how entertaining this is going to be. And there's some complaint lately that some of the stations on there right now aren't particularly entertaining, but others of them are just hilarious.
Right. Now you mentioned that, and even years ago I could remember the pirate jammers. We would call them pirate jammers, and they would be nothing more than people who have ham rigs, and they were talking in lower sideband or whatever, or upper sideband, and they would just be jamming, just talking, and there was no content to their programming. There was no programming at all.
Yes, and I don't know why anybody would find that fascinating. I certainly don't.
No, and they would call themselves the voice of ICOM or something like that, and it was like, okay, but now you get into the classics. What was it? Radio Clandestine?
Yes, R.F. Burns. That was one of the all-time classics. He put a tremendous amount of production effort into his shows, and all of them were just absolutely rip-roaringly hilarious. I had an interesting experience about a month ago. They had me as a guest on Spectrum, which is the communication programs that when is that, on 11 o'clock on Saturday nights on WWCR. And they have a talk show, and one of the guys that called into that was a pirate operator, and he was the guy who was responsible for the Mexican food numbers station.
Oh, Mexican food numbers? Fill me in on that one.
Yeah, anybody who has done any shortwave listening at all, sooner or later is going to run across the spy number stations. These are stations that do nothing but over and over broadcast series of coded numbers.
Number stations, yes.
And there's been an argument over the years as to why would the CIA or the old KGB want to do this, and some of the stations actually have been proven to be sending coded messages to spies in the field, although I think most of the ones we hear are just markers holding a channel like an interval signal. But anyway, one of the pirate guys produced a parody to this. It was a number station. It had the synthesized voice just reading numbers over and over, but all of the numbers were Mexican foods. So that the guy was saying guacamole, taco, enchilada, you know.
I never heard that one. Oh.
And that I thought was pretty clever. And this guy actually called up on Spectrum. In fact, he wanted to know how somebody went about getting a mail drop. So I told him. But he hasn't done anything yet, so I still haven't QSL'd the Mexican foods.
Oh, what is your current QSL count? I know that about 10 years ago, I think you had just reached 100 or so.
Well, Dave, I haven't looked for long enough to remember the exact number, but it's I haven't gotten to 400 different stations yet, but I'm well over 350, so it's in that range somewhere.
Wow, you've over tripled. I think you may have been at 100 or 200. I can't remember when you were here, but you brought your the book there with all the QSLs in it, and when I looked through it, I was very impressed. I mean, these are like very rare, 1 in a million QSLs. So, and now you're over 300. Wow.
Well, let me talk about the 1 in a million, the one that I like the most. People can see that. I have it up on my website, and I'm keeping us on theme on this show. You've mentioned the name previously in this program of the guy that was involved, but I'll keep the name anonymous to protect the guilty here. I happened to, by complete chance, to be listening to a station while it was busted. The guy was on there with the programming. The station was WHBH. Hillbilly Heaven was the name of this, and basically played country music and bluegrass music, is what it was.
And you were listening at the time that he got busted?
I was listening, and all of a sudden the thing goes off the air, and it comes back on the air, and it was Agent Ellington from the FCC coming on to make a bust announcement. This is Agent Ellington. WHBH is now off the air. Does no longer exist. This is the FCC, and well, I had the tape running too, fortunately, and so I replayed the tape, and I says, well, why not? I sat down and wrote a reception report and I mailed it to the FCC headquarters in Washington, D.C.
And you got a reply.
About 3 weeks later came a letter back from the FCC, and it was a copy of the press release that the FCC had issued when they made this bust. And attached to the press release is a post-it note from the FCC enforcement guy saying, yes, I verify your report on this announcement. So I have what I think is the only QSL from a pirate station operated by the FCC itself and signed by the FCC.
That's unbelievable. That is you have a QSL from the FCC on a pirate bust.
Yes. Yes, this definitely was a broadcast by an FCC agent using the same transmitter that he was just busting. And they verified it, so I don't know. They were in a good mood down in Washington that day, I guess. So that certainly is my all-time prize QSL card, no question about it.
Oh, that's unbelievable. That is amazing. And you still have the tape of the bust itself?
Yes, I'm not sure where it is in this pile of junk here, but I do have that.
Oh, that's great. That's. I'd like to hear that someday.
I have that actually on a cart someplace because once in a while I do go on a commercial station to do like that Spectrum thing we had last week or a few weeks ago. But I've done some things here locally as well, and usually I prepare little snips of programming from pirate stations that we stick into the broadcast somewhere, just so that people can hear what these guys sound like. And that was one of them I often have used on the air. That usually cracks up the host when he hears the FCC talking over a pirate station.
Oh yeah, normally I'm watching Internet Relay Chat Channel as we're doing the netcast, but I'm concentrating on talking to you. But Jennifer, who lives in Colorado, says asks if you know anything about maybe a pirate called Radio North Sea.
Yes, well, that's a Euro pirate. In fact, there's been a couple of different stations have used that name over the years. One of them goes way back in history. One of the early ship broadcasters, which is where the pirates came from in the first place in the 60s. European country. In fact, this is less true today than it endeavors or were actually thinking of themselves as real broadcasters, whereas the pirates over here have been more hobby-type operations. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, just think about it for a second. When the Beatles came out, they could not be heard on the radio in England, which is where they were from, because the BBC had all the broadcasting stations, and they refused to play the music at first. So if you wanted to hear the Beatles, you had to either listen to one of the pirates or listen to Radio Luxembourg or someplace nearby to England at night. And this seems crazy to us, but this is the way they ran broadcasting in most of the European countries for a long time.
Oh, many, many years.
And, of course, over here, I don't know, we're starting to get back to that now, too, Dave. If you ask me, there's about 3 guys that own all the United States radio stations now. They've merged everything into about 2 companies.
Yeah, it's beginning to look like that. There used to be a rule or a law where you couldn't own more than, 1 or 2 radio stations, but now what's it up to, like 8 radio stations in each market?
It is literally true here in Cleveland that a large majority of the radio stations in Cleveland are owned by 2 companies, which is it's actually despicable in my view.
It's a shame.
It's ruined the nature of programming, and when you get to the smaller towns, it's killed programming altogether. They don't have local broadcasting anymore. They just download all the programming off a satellite, and they're just using a transmitter locally, and then they sell ads locally, and that's all. It's really a sad thing of what's happening to broadcasting in this country. And the only thing that might save us is things like what you and I are doing here today. There's starting to become competition for broadcasting from areas that can't be regulated by monopoly licenses, and I think in the long run that's going to finally put a stop to this crazy situation that we've got on the broadcasting bans in the United States today.
Well, I certainly agree with you. We don't need one owner owning 8 or 10 radio stations, in each market, because each radio station becomes so generic, and you just listen to it, and it's like, okay, forget it. Where's my shortwave radio?
Yes, I find myself doing that all the time. Actually, television is getting that bad too, to an extent, but it's being the competition in television is through cable, and that's starting to run the regular television stations out of business. I think I am the last guy in Cleveland who does not subscribe to cable television.
Well, good for you. But that's besides the point. I have different opinions of that, but we won't get into that. What haven't we covered here so far? We're going a little bit over time here, folks. We're talking about pirate. You were talking about innovative pirate broadcasters, George, and what are your thoughts or memories? And I wonder if this particular radio station, pirate station, the voice of laryngitis, has ever come up again, or has he had a permanent case of laryngitis lately?
Oh, you took the words out of my mouth. When, if I go on a regular commercial station, that's one of the first questions almost always they ask, what are some of the good stations? And that's the first one I always mention, because not only was the programming absolutely first class, a tremendous production of original comedy that was funny as hell,